just a short note on terminology. I mean, Michael, you sort of defined nicely conspiracy theories, what it means and what academics mean when they use the term. Active measures is not really an academic term. It's actually a term that originated in the KGB handbook on political warfare during the Cold War. It's an English translation of the Russian Aktivnie мероприятия, and it's sort of a toolbox of political warfare, including disinformation, spread of forgeries, and other means of influence that are non-military, but somewhere in the gray zone between diplomacy and war. And if we talk about disinformation and the way it's been used by Russian intelligence services, and I'll come back to the case of Ukraine in a while, but historically there was a close connection with conspiracy theories, of course, because they can sometimes take the shape of a conspiracy theory. Some of the most well-known examples that continue to live on are, for example, the idea that the US military used chemical warfare in Korea. So this was a conspiracy theory or a disinformation campaign launched in the 50s by the KGB, one of the first in the post-war period. The idea that the CIA was behind the assassination of John F. Kennedy was also an idea pushed by the KGB. And in the 80s, the idea that Pentagon was behind the HIV/AIDS virus was also something that was spread by the KGB across the whole world. And these ideas continue to live on. I mean, you have a well-known movie director, Oliver Stone, who made a movie about the assassination of Kennedy, where he draws on the CIA conspiracy. There was a similar Swedish director who made a documentary about the HIV virus in the 80s, a school project. It was a film made for schools, and he believed in the KGB theory, and so the movie was eventually stopped. But it shows that these conspiracy theories can sometimes, or disinformation campaigns, they sometimes take the shape of a conspiracy theory, that there is a hidden conspiracy, a small group of people plotting against a large population somehow using vile means. And this is, of course, very much a definition of a conspiracy theory. And as you mentioned, Michael, we see it today in the way Russian media is operating. Russia today is, of course, glad to invite conspiracy theorists talking about vaccines or 9/11 truthers, etc., RT, Sputnik. They give these people a platform, and they are amplified in social media using these so-called bots or troll factories. And it's been quite well documented in two recent monographs. I could mention Ilya Yablokov, a Russian scholar who has a book on Russian conspiracy theories, and Elliot Borenstein, a professor at NYU, if I'm not mistaken. And with that said, I should mention that disinformation in the Russian sort of meaning of the word or the term is not necessarily false information. So in some ways, disinformation can be different from a conspiracy theory. Disinformation can also be information that is used selectively or in a tendentious manner in order to create a certain narrative or a certain perception. So if you take the hack and leak operation of the Hillary Clinton campaign emails in 2016, that was not a spread of so much a conspiracy theory around the emails, but they created a false narrative around what the emails actually said, leaking the information in a selective manner. So conspiracy theories and active measures are not sort of identical, but they can overlap. And in Ukraine, of course, we have seen this to a degree I think is unprecedented, because all the forces of the propaganda machinery have been unleashed on Ukraine now for about 7 years. And it's been ongoing, so it's layer over layer over layer. And these campaigns do not necessarily go away because of the digital information space. They remain out there and can continue to circulate. And we have seen several conspiracy theories regarding the downing of the MH17 civilian plane over the occupied territories of eastern Ukraine. The role of George Soros, which is sort of recurring in not only Russian, but also global sort of Western conspiracy theories. But more broadly, the war with Ukraine and the broader conflict between Russia and the West has also amplified a conspiratorial discourse in the Russian political and military establishment. So in a way, the Ukrainian war, the war with Ukraine sort of has led to an increased emphasis on these, on the conspiratorial mindset, also in the Russian domestic discourse, aimed for primarily a Russian domestic audience. Sergei Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who is otherwise a well-respected politician, he has spoken about how the Western states use the theory he calls organized chaos, upravляемый хаос. So it's a conspiracy theory that the Western states are using a toolbox in order to overthrow governments. And although, I mean, and we'll come back to that, because sometimes these concepts have elements of truth. So for example, the US overthrew Saddam Hussein in 2003, coalition of Western states overthrew Gaddafi in 2011. But what the conspiracy theory does is that it radicalizes these ideas into a more general, broader framework, which is then applied also to situations where it doesn't apply, such as in Ukraine, for example. Another term that was always there and was a popular conspiracy theory also in the West is the New World Order theory, which is very present in the Russian domestic political discourse, where you sometimes see it in articles. They just refer to NPM, which is the acronym Novy Mirovy Porядok, New World Order in Russian. So it's a sign that the author of this article, for example, understands what's really going on, so to speak. So it's a way of signaling that you have access to some hidden information about how the world really operates. Last but not least, I say this based on an article that I recently published in Journal of Strategic Studies with colleagues on conspiracy theories in Russian security thinking, where we document the presence of conspiracy theories in a quite narrow segment of the population, which is the people in the sort of military and security establishment. So not the key decision makers, but perhaps, the segment of people underneath them, the sort of people who should actually inform decision making with their analysis. And if you look at the leading military and security journals in Russia today, for the last decade, which is the time period we analyzed, it's riddled with conspiracy theories. Interestingly, as Joe mentioned, we don't know whether or not the presence of conspiracy theories have gone up globally. And in our case study, we find that it's been relatively stable, actually. So in certain segments of the Russian community, for example, in the security establishment, it seems that conspiracy theories were always there, or for a long time they were there. But what happened since the war with Ukraine and the conflict with the West was that they became more mainstream, and they were perhaps more likely to be picked up by Russian politicians. And this is also something that we see, that conspiracy theories planted in these journals or published in these journals, they can then be recycled by leading politicians such as Patrushev, the head of the FSB, Reshetnikov, a well-known intelligence officer, or even Putin himself, who made a comment a few years ago on an alleged US chemical warfare laboratory in Georgia. And here we come back again to the longevity of certain conspiracy theories. I mentioned historically in the 50s, there was the accusation of the US military engaging in chemical warfare in Korea. We see how these conspiracy theories, they refuse to go away. And this reminds us of a last comment I would just like to mention, and you find this comment also in Thomas Ridd's recent book, an excellent book called Active Measures, where he documents how in certain respects, the Russian intelligence agencies have seemed to, not only they have undermined the outside world with this information, but also themselves. Because in some ways, after decades and decades of circulating certain conspiracy theories and disinformation, they become convinced that some of these ideas may be actually true, because the origin of the theories sort of disappears. It becomes thinner over time, and people lose track of reality in a way. Thank you.